Welcome to our special edition podcast of the SBOM Silver Bullet Executive Series. My name is Nancy Richardson, founder of VOC Company, hosting today's discussion. On today's podcast, we have Elisabeth George, founder of Elisabeth George Consulting, former global regulatory leader at Philips, now creatively helping medical device manufacturers navigate through the regulatory and compliance requirements. Also joining us today is Ken Zalevsky, who has extensive certification in cybersecurity, expertise, and experience resourced by the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the FDA. He's also led a cybersecurity organization at Bayer and now the CEO and founder of Vigilant Ops. Both are recognized global authorities, speakers, and leaders in several industry medical association working groups focused on technology, regulations, and impact. To kick this off, Ken, please tell us a little bit about the last webinar we had on IMDRF.
Be happy to, Nancy, thank you. So the last webinar that we did was with Afton Ross from FDA, and Afton gave a fantastic presentation on the two recently released IMDRF guidance documents. That's International Medical Device Regulators Forum guidance documents on the subject of SBOMs and legacy medical devices. And, you know, as we heard on that webinar, there's a big expectation that medical device manufacturers will manage their cybersecurity risk, excuse me, through the total product lifecycle. So TPLC is an image that's in the guidance documentation and really spells out pretty clearly the stages of the life cycle. During that life cycle, they'll also communicate this risk with their stakeholders, and they'll take responsibility for this risk. And so we've heard that many times, shared risk from FDA, device manufacturers, as well as consumers of those devices need to take that responsibility and share in that risk. And it's great to have Elisabeth here on this webinar. We're looking forward to getting Elisabeth's feedback and comments on the guidance. She wasn't able to make the last webinar. So Elisabeth, I know you know about these guidance documents, you're very familiar with them, I'm sure. Given the expectations that I just talked about with respect to device manufacturers and how they're spelled out in the IMDRF documents, what do you see, or what can you maybe take away as the biggest challenge to manufacturers with regards to implementing, these guidelines?
Well, first, Ken, thank you very much for a great question. And Nancy, thank you for the introduction. I think for me, the biggest challenge is going to be education. Education of all of those stakeholders and everybody that's involved across the total product life cycle. Everyone always assumes, and I think we've heard this throughout the years in discussion of cybersecurity, well, cybersecurity, oh, that's those cyber geeks that we have over there sitting in R&D. They'll worry about it. Then somebody now came out with these guidances, regulations, standards, all of these documents. Now people are saying, oh, well, regulatory will worry about it. Well, the problem is that regulatory barely knows how to spell cybersecurity, to be very honest with you. Cyber people don't normally know that much about regulations. So everybody has to work together to understand what are the requirements, how do I implement them, how do I ensure that it's effective, am I thinking throughout that total product life cycle, and from start to finish of all of those items, the product, hardware, the software, all the components. And then how do I help educate my customers to make sure they understand what their obligations are and how they can ensure the continued compliance and safety of their products? Because the last thing we need is to have a cyber event that takes down a hospital or takes down a product and, God forbid, injures or harms or worse any patient. So from my perspective, that is the biggest challenge that we have. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of them, but I think if I had to pick one, that's the one I would pick.
That's great. That was a great answer, and it really brings to light just the issues you think about inside an organization, those natural silos that exist. I would say organically have grown up in the organization over time, and you really need to kind of, to your point, permeate those silos and make that communication internally effective. So yeah, fantastic answer, and agree, it's a big challenge. With respect to the guidance documents themselves, and you mentioned it there, Elizabeth, communication is quite the core principle. If you think about it, you said it a couple different ways, even internal communication amongst the organizational functions, and then external communication with stakeholders, as you mentioned. One of the big keys, and as you know, in those guidance documents, was the kind of that total product life cycle and looking at end of life and end of support. And they seem to be kind of keys to enabling this stakeholders to really plan and manage the risk they deal with respect to the devices. With those specific in mind, so transitioning from end of life or end of support, do you have any comments around maybe how that might be challenging, or maybe what a manufacturer might do to kind of take a good stab and a good run at starting to implement some of these things?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I see with regards to end of life and end of support is, in theory, those have always been an expectation by our regulators and more importantly, even by our customers. There's an expectation that nothing's going to live forever. No product is going to be stagnant and survive everything, no matter how expensive it is. It's still going to have its life. One of the key challenges that I see when we talk about things like end of support and end of life is people think of our products as a product by itself. And the biggest challenge is that all of the different components, whether it be hardware or software components, all have their own end of life and end of support. If you think of things that are commonly remembered are batteries. Batteries only last so long. We have to replace a battery. We have to put a new battery in. Well, guess what? Same thing with software. Same thing with operating systems. Same thing with the PCs that we utilize. And each and every one of those items has its own expected life, expected support that's required, maintenance. Think about your car. You take your car in for oil changes. You have your tires rotated. You have all those things. The car doesn't last forever. You're having to remove and replace all those parts. So I think that one of the big challenges that industry is going to have is they need to remember that when they sell their solution, that it is just that. It is a solution. It is a system. It's made up of many different items. And when they start to identify what is the expected life of that product, they have to think about every one of those little items unto themselves. And they have to then extrapolate that out to determine really how long is the overall product going to last. And they have to be able to communicate. We talked about communication. They have to be able to communicate that in an effective way that you don't have a customer believe that something is going to last forever, that they don't need to maintain it. They don't need to buy upgrade packages. They don't need to replace those batteries. So replace that operating system. Just the other day, I realized that my cell phone is already up at version 13 of my cell phone. Well, version 13 that's just the cell phone itself, but the 40,000 apps that I seem to have downloaded onto my phone all have their own versions, and some of those apps don't work with version 13. So it's those are all the extrapolations that have to be considered. So I think that what a manufacturer is faced with is it's a very complex system that we have all made, and that we have to have the best ways to document that, maintain that, and be able to communicate what actions are necessary. And our regulators are trying to help us with these guidance documents. They're trying to remind us of the importance of it. They're not telling us how to do it. They're telling us what we should do. And I think that that is one of the great things that the IMDRF guidance documents, first off, they're called a guidance document. They're not mandated. They are there for guidance. And so we should be working together, our regulators, our customers, our cyber people, our design people, our marketing, everybody, to figure out what is the best way to capture that information, monitor it, and maintain it. So hopefully I answered that question, because I feel like I went all over the place, but
No, it's
I think
great.
that's
And
one of the things with this is it does have us go all over the place.
no, the answer was great. I mean, I think you made a great analogy there with various parts within a system or solution, and the battery analogy was great. With respect to, and I think what I hear you saying, and another key point is, again, going back to communication, the manufacturers making the stakeholders aware of risk, cybersecurity risk, and to your point, doing that in an upfront way with respect to the devices. So this is the life of the device. This is the expectation that you should have as a stakeholder and someone who's deploying this device in your ecosystem. That's all recommended to be communicated upfront, which is something kind of new to manufacturers, right? I mean, a lot of that was after the fact, and post-surveillance marketing and things like that covered a lot of that. But if you think about today, with FDA's, even their stance on this is, show us your plan to monitor vulnerabilities prior to even releasing that product into the market. So I think what you said was right on the money, and it is kind of, like you said, all over the map and covers a lot of areas. But the key seems to be communicating this risk and doing it in a timely manner, and even FDA saying get that out there prior to releasing the product. So a lot of good points there, and a lot of good conversation. So thank you. So I guess in closing, and we'll just have time for one last question, I think. In general, your thoughts overall on the IMDRF guidance documents, and maybe what you see as a potential impact on quality and regulatory functions in device manufacturers.
Well, I think first off, there's a lot more work that people haven't necessarily fully embraced. I think that if I think about it from the process standpoint, I think integrating more of these requirements and expectations into the standard way of working. I didn't intentionally say the quality management system, because some things will be in the quality management system, but I also think some things should be in the business system. It should be just the way of working. It should be part of human nature, just to do it. It's just make it happen kind of thing. I think that there's work to integrate that, just to get people to think of it as common sense. And we all know that common sense is not necessarily common. So we want to make sure that that's embraced. I think from a regulatory perspective, we're looking at it across that total product life cycle. It's got to be a part of the requirements that we impose on our vendors when we purchase things. It's got to be part of the regulatory and standard strategy that we partner with our cyber and our R&D folk on how to determine that. It's got to be a part of the process of utilized. What is those risks? You mentioned that a couple times, Ken. Risk is critical. I mean, some people think just something used in the home, therefore it must be lower risk. Well, guess what? Sometimes it's a higher risk, because you've got to take into consideration that you don't necessarily have the high level of training and the high level of oversight and multiple checkpoints that you do in a hospital. So you have to take those things into consideration. And then I think that, the key thing is the continuous learning process of how it's being utilized in the field, and listen to what's going on. And we cannot be so narrowly focused to just focus on the product that we make or that we manufacture. We have to monitor what's going on with our competition. We have to leverage the wonderful systems concept that cybersecurity is embracing, making use of all of the wonderful databases out there that tell you what the risks and the vulnerabilities, et cetera, are, so that we can be monitoring and learning from that, and we integrate that in. And I think lastly, we have to not be afraid to do what you mentioned before. Make that decision to say something is end of life or end of support. We have to make that decision. And I think that that's been a hard one for many companies to do is just to say, I'm done. This product is done. We've got to sunset it. We've got to put it away and try something new. And I think that that's a really big challenge. And, I want to say that I know that there's so much more that we could talk about. I think cybersecurity and talking about the regulations and the communications and partnership is something that we need to keep talking about. And I'm excited that you and the team are continuing these webinars and podcasts and et cetera, because we've got so much more that we can share and listen to others on as well. So I'm excited about that. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to allow me to babble a little bit about regulations and share my perspective. So I really appreciate it.
Of course, Elizabeth, always great to have you, and your insight is invaluable. So thank you.
Nancy's on mute.
On mute. Thank you both for alerting me to my mute button. So thank you both today. I feel like we could talk about this for hours and still capture interest. There's so many facets to this across the whole organization, not just about compliance and not just about regulatory compliance itself, but the impact across the organization that really helps capture. It's a collective effort, I guess, is the point and takeaway you guys took together. So as for the key points, we're looking at the regulatory and compliance leaders are the stakeholders, but it really takes the whole team relative to the latest security, IMDRF security guidance. And collaboration is critical. Both pre and post market compliance, I guess that's another major that you made a point of today, and we'll be continuing throughout the series. I really appreciate both of you, taking the time today. We're also looking forward to your participation at our next special webcast, which is going to be, from what I hear, and I won't let out all the tips yet, but at the next one in early September is supposed to be really fascinating. And we have a few participants there that will be adding to the panelist group. Avoid, refuse, to accept with right cybersecurity strategy. So with that, thank you again. It's been a great session, another great session. We look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.